Just as a reminder, kitting management, this allows us to better understand those biosecurity practices and what exactly they're doing around the time of kitting. A lot of these questions ask about bucks and does separately, and it's likely that on dairy operations they'll be treating them separately, but on a lot of your meat, goat, or pet or other types of operations, they won't be treating them differently. So just make sure that you write the same answer if they have one practice for both bucks and does in each column. And we'll go through that a little more as we move on to the next questions. Let me pull out my questionnaire here. Okay, so producers should answer on what the operation usually did during the previous 12 months. Questions refer to the most recently completed kitting period. All pregnant does have kitted. And then useful definitions for this section are in section 4, page 56. So what if an operation has no defined kitting period and they're just kitting year-round whenever things hit the ground? So provide information on all those does and kids that have kitted, that were born in the last 12 months from the date that you're there. So in this section, section 1 is a screener again. So did you have, during the previous 12 months, were any kids born on this operation? If they say no, we didn't have any kids born here, you're going to skip to section D. So you won't complete any of section C. If they did have kids born on the operation, then you'll move on to question 2. This we're getting numbers of kids born alive and dead, and then you'll sum those two for C for a total number of kids born. Like the inventory, these will be used as denominators to calculate percent of kids based on certain practices. And then C3 is kitting management practices. So we ask about how frequently the kitting areas are checked for newborns in hours. How often were navels dipped on newborn kids with a chlorhexidine or iodine solution? And we'll go into a couple what ifs of this. Like what if they use an herbal rub? What if they're using something that isn't chlorhexidine or iodine? And then were kids physically separated from their dams prior to weaning of milk? So a couple what ifs on this. What if the producer has a video camera in the kitting area and it's continuously monitored from the house? Record 0.1. For how frequently the kitting areas were checked, and then make a note in the margin describing that they're using a video monitor. What if the producer uses a homeopathic product to dip the umbilicus? Say never, because that product is not chlorhexidine or iodine. So we only care about chlorhexidine or iodine. What if the producer, so for C2, here's a what if for you. What if the producer found a dead kid in the pasture but doesn't know if it was born alive or dead? Ask the producer to use their best judgment. Obviously, as a vet, you have no clue because you weren't there for that situation. So if they really just can't decide, and since they found it dead, count it as being born dead. So let's say with C3B, once again, the dipping of the umbilicus, this should be done immediately after birth. So let's say that they just wait until the end of the week and then they dip all the kids that were born their umbilicus. Say never, because that's not correct practice. So we want to know who's correctly doing that practice and dipping the umbilicus with products that work. The duration of separation, so let's see here. So we'll move on to C4. So this question is during the most recently completed kitting period, how many hours of days following birth were bucks and doe kids separated from their dams? So if they were removed immediately, you'll check A, or you'll check the 1 there. If it's greater than 24 hours, record in days, and if it's less than 24 hours, record in hours. So whichever one fits best. And once again, here we ask about does and buck kids separately. If they're the same, just make sure you fill it in for both. And then C5 through 7 in this section is specific to kitting areas. So we give a definition of kitting areas. For the purpose of the next 3 questions, kitting areas are specific areas to which does are moved to kid. So if they don't move them, you will say no, and you'll skip to question 8. If they do use a kitting area, then you'll answer 6 and 7. And one of the things you'll see throughout this questionnaire is that, and we haven't done this in all of our NAHMS studies in the past, but we think it's important to differentiate between cleaning and disinfecting. So we've come up with this new scheme where we ask about cleaning separately and then disinfection separately. And we have a note here that describes what we consider disinfection. So they need to be using a chemical disinfectant such as a 1 to 10 bleach solution, a phenolic product, or accelerated hydrogen peroxide product. If they're on a dirt environment and they do put down lime, we'll count that as a disinfection as well. Let's see here. So I think 8 and 9, once again, just remember to do buck kids and doe kids separately. For 8, and we'll discuss this in the other questions as well, nursing only. So that has to be nursing directly from the dam. So they're suckling directly from the dam versus if they're nursing from a bottle, we would consider that hand feeding. Bucket feeding will also be considered hand feeding. So anything that's not nursing directly from the dam would be considered hand feeding. So C14, this is similar to C12 or C8 where we ask about colostrum, but now we're asking about liquid diet types. So this would be any milk replacer. It could be goat's milk, it could be cow's milk. So we want to know how they're receiving that. If they're nursing only from the dam, which would be possible on quite a few of your operations, you'll put 100% in that in 14A, and then you'll skip to section D since the next questions are only about those animals that are receiving milk or milk replacer product through some sort of hand feeding. Let's see if there's any others. So I have a couple what ifs. So for section C, question 14, what if most kids were allowed to nurse colostrum but then removed from dams after their first nursing and started on milk replacer? So for the colostrum, you would say nursing, one second, let me see, C15. Okay, let's start this one over. Sorry guys, so C15, A through J. What if most kids were allowed to nurse colostrum but then removed from their dams after nursing and started on milk replacer? So then you would select what type of milk replacer they were started on and record that. And then C15 again, if they're giving cow's milk, include that for E for C15, and it doesn't matter if it's pasteurized or waste milk. We just want to know if they're giving any cow's milk.
Oh, I have a question.
Yes.
So sometimes, this is a what if question, I guess.
Yep.
Sometimes, for scours, you might give extra colostrum, like colostrum cubes or something. So what if they give colostrum after the initial colostrum period, and that's part of the liquid diet that they give?
So this is just the general practice of what they're giving for liquid diet. If it's just for the sick kids, I wouldn't worry about it too much. But if it's something they're doing regularly, then write it in the other.
Gotcha.
But yeah, if it's just like for a treatment here or there for scours, don't worry about that.
Sounds good.
Any other questions on this section? Once again, we ask about cleaning of the milk equipment if they're feeding. So we have the definition of disinfectant in there again. And that's really all I have for this section for you guys. Is there any questions on section C? And just as a reminder, if they're not doing different practices for bucks and does, just write it in both columns and move on. So with that, we'll do section C and D scenarios together here in a minute. I'll run through section D, which is parasite control. As Kath mentioned yesterday, one of our goals is to estimate the burden, the economic burden of parasites for producers. So some of these questions will touch on that. If we look, so the first couple questions are on FAMACHA and if they've heard about it and if they use it. Tomorrow, you guys will have the opportunity to do some FAMACHA scoring, and we'll talk a little more about FAMACHA this afternoon as well. Question D3 asks about the number of goats that were tested for internal parasites in the previous 12 months. So in this section, pay close attention to when we're talking about number of tests and number of goats. And we've bolded when we're talking about number of tests. So D3 is asking for a specific number of tests, and that's followed up in question 4, where we're asking what tests were used. So a couple what ifs for that. The producer has 20 goats and each one was tested twice by fecal flotation. So each goat, so in that one, so for D4, for fecal float, we want to know how many of the following tests were performed on goats in your herd. So count each test separately. For example, if you had 20 goats on each, and each one was tested twice by fecal flotation, there should be a 40 there. So this is wrong. I apologize for that. That should be listed as a 40. And then for, let's say that they do a fecal egg count reduction test on those same 20 goats, and they do that twice as well, you would still record a 40 there. Let's say they do a fecal egg count reduction test and they only do it once. On the 20 goats, you would put a 20. So even though you're doing a pre and a post, that's counted as one test. Does that make sense? I know that was a little messy. I apologize. So we want to know number of tests. If you do a fecal flotation, we consider that a test. If you do a fecal egg count reduction test, which would be a pre and post fecal flotation, that's still one test. Does that make sense? Okay. And then, let's see, there's one other. I think we covered all that, so we'll go on to the next one. So one thing to note on D6, during the previous 3 years, did you deworm any goats with medication or natural alternative dewormers? So we've bolded that time frame since it's different. It's the 3 years, not the normal months that we talk about. So if they say no, you'll skip to question 11 because the next few questions are about deworming in the past 12 months. So question 7 is the frequency of deworming during the previous 12 months. So how many kids and adult goats on the operation were never dewormed, dewormed once, twice, or 3 or more times? So you'll enter the number of goats, adults and kids, by the number of times they were dewormed in the previous 12 months. D8 is a list of products and used to treat worms in the last 12 months. And here's where they get their participation to write in other products that they're using. So you could write in herbs, those types of things. So we ask about high tannin concentrated plants, natural or alternative substances, so you might get some others there. And then we ask about the classes of anthelmetics as well. And to help them answer that, you can use the anthlemetic reference card, which is located in the back of the questionnaire. And that will show you, just as a reminder, what active ingredient it is and what class it's located in. So then you can place it accordingly.
For questions like 8 that have a lot of different options, are you reading off every single option to them so they can say yes, no, I don't know? Or are you letting them answer that question?
So they might not think of something if you don't read it to them. So I'd recommend reading it to them. I also recommend, so I know Eric said this isn't good, but we say give them a questionnaire to follow along with. We know it's not best practice, but these are lengthy and there's some tricky questions. And if I was a producer, I would want to be following along. If it's easiest for you as well, you can provide them the questionnaire ahead of time so they have a little bit of an idea of what you're asking, what you're looking for. So it may not be best practice, but we also want this to be enjoyable for you guys and make it somewhat easier. And if that means giving the producer a questionnaire, then let them follow along. And so they should have this list in front of them, and that should help you so you don't have to read each one individually.
Can we have a copy of the questionnaire electronically?
Yes, it's all on our website. And it's up there now, so you can go take it whenever. You can always email it to them. If you want it in like a PDF format, let me know. You should be able to download it from PDF on the website, I think. If not, let me know and we'll get you a PDF version as well.
So would the order kind of be you're calling them, getting ready, see if you're going out there, and you ask them, are you willing to take this survey, and then you email it to them if they say yes?
Yeah, that's what I would do. So what I've done in the past when I've emailed them, I say, hey, it's pretty lengthy. You might want some records on hand before. Do you want a copy to look at before I visit?
I'd be nervous that they'd see it and say, nope.
Yeah. Yeah. Another option, if you want, I put together like a list of records that would be best for them to have on hand. So we can provide you guys with that as well. If you don't want to scare them off, because this is lengthy, you can provide them the list of records that would be best to have on hand ahead of time. And so that way they have them there, but they're not overwhelmed by this. So we'll get that emailed out to all of you guys. Any other questions? Okay. Let's see if I have any other what ifs here. So we were on D8. So once again, deworming here can include herbal, natural, or alternative dewormers. We'll catch all of those. Make sure you don't include dewormers that are used to treat coccidia. We will address coccidia separately later on in the questionnaire. And then once again, the reference card could be useful. Let's see here, what else do we have? So D9, we're only looking for product costs. So this question is asking about, so let's see, what was the total amount spent on deworming products administered to goats on your operation during the previous 12 months? So if a veterinarian administered a product, include the cost of the product, do not include the cost of the veterinarian coming out to visit. So if they have like a service fee and an administration fee, don't include those, but include the cost of the product.
Does that include the coccidia ones or no?
Say that again?
Does that include products for treatment of coccidia? You don't.
Don't include products for coccidia. Nope. This is just for deworming. We will address coccidia in the antibiotic feed section. So D10 in section D is the top 3 reasons that a producer chooses to deworm their goats in order of importance. So we want their most important reason, second most important reason, and third most important reason. If they really only have one, they say, you know what, I just do it on a schedule and that's the only reason why. You would put 1 in the most important reason and then put NA and B and C. And then the last question is D11 in this section. So this question should be answered by everyone, even if they don't deworm. So if they don't deworm, you'll skip to question 11 here. And you'll mark yes to any activities that the producers do to control internal parasites. And then the last question in this section, we have our one token question on external parasites. We just ask if they've observed any lice, mites, or ticks on their goats in the past 12 months. And so with that, we're through section D. We'll take a quick break into groups and do scenarios for section C and D.